Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're talking about Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, the live-action film currently in theaters, and my guest is the production designer, Liz Toonkel. Liz, welcome to Below the Line.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Glad you're here. Now, a warning for listeners, today's conversation may contain spoilers for the film. But first, Liz, tell me about this project and how you got involved.
Sure. So some people might know that this IP has existed for a while. Jenny Slate and Dean Fleischer Camp made a couple of shorts that were a big sensation on YouTube.
Back in 2010.
Yes. A long time ago. They also wrote one or two children's books based on the character and his world. And so, it's just been out there in the ether for a while. And I got involved because I actually knew both of them before they even made Marcel, because I went to NYU Film School with Dean. He edited my thesis film I made there. And he started dating Jenny at the time. So I met her then. And then just through like a lot of happy coincidences, I knew a lot of other people involved in the project. So I was lucky enough to be brought on.
Now, it's an interesting take on that. As you mentioned, it was made a long time ago, 2010 with these original shorts. And listeners, by the way, you can go find those on YouTube and get some context what we're talking about with Marcel the Shell. But it's a long time between those original shorts and this film coming out.
One of the things that I really respect about Dean and Jenny and the other people involved, like Elizabeth Holm, one of the producers, is that they had so much respect for the project and sort of like the ideas behind it that they didn't just want to sell it to the highest bidder. Like they literally went the other route and like turned down every possible offer. And we're like, how do we make this on our own so that we maintain creative control and continue to give it like that special sparkle that it had from the beginning? So that took a long time. And then beyond that, we shot the live action portion of the film in summer of 2019. And then they started doing the stop motion in the winter of 2020. And then it had to shut down for maybe almost a year. And then beyond that, there's a lot of effects in the film and other things that just like made it have a very long timeline beyond just the time they took to, decide how they wanted to pursue it and also write the script and record it.
Oh, wow. So at what point did you start in with prep on this? In other words, where in this process were they when you came on board?
They were very far along. Like they had already, started working with CineReach and, had the funding for the film. They had already made an animatic of the whole film rather than writing a script. And an animatic is basically like, sort of like storyboards of the film that are almost animated. And they had already recorded all of the audio. So by the time I came in, like it was very clear what the project was, how they were moving forward with it. And I was just sort of there to help realize it and bring it more out into the world.
Well, Liz, talk to me about your job as a production designer and how this film was a unique challenge.
The job of a production designer can appear very like vague or opaque or unclear to those that don't work in film and even a lot of people that do. So basically, I'm responsible for everything that's in front of the camera that isn't the actors and what they're wearing. It's sort of like when you go to Disneyland, like I would be the one who created that environment you just walked into. It's an exciting job because you're really there to help build out the world and like tell the story further through space and time. My job on this film was really unique because not only did I do that for sort of like human world and human scale, I also had to think about what the world was that Marcel and his community resided in.
Right. So again, for folks who are sticking with us, even though you haven't seen it, Marcel and his family and friends are basically little knickknacks. Like you might pick up at a shop where it's, someone's gotten a shell from the beach, giving it an eye, in this case, giving it some shoes, and it's alive. And so interacts with the entire world at that tiny inch tall scale. But at the same time, there are humans involved. This larger world that they live in is our world.
Yeah, and I like Kirsten Lepore, who's the animation director on the film and also helped create a lot of the characters. She always approached it that, the other members of Marcel's community are almost like these things that have fallen into the couch, like a piece of Chex Mix or things like that. What I find really compelling about Marcel and his community is that they kind of like beg us and in the narrative of the film, Dean, to kind of like look at the things in our world that we're not paying attention to. So that's what we thought a lot about with the design is like, oh, this windowsill that you walk by every day. But actually, if you put the camera there, you see how beautiful it is. And, like a spider who built an amazing web in it. And so I really appreciate that the film is asking you to like pay attention to the world around you and like respect it. And as you mentioned, in terms of like the scale and its relationship to the human world, it was really important that everything in Marcel's world originally came from the human world. It was something that, and often it's a thing that we've forgotten about, that we didn't even notice was gone. It's almost like losing a sock in the washing machine, and where it ended up. And so I think there's something really special about that too, to just see it's sort of like in Toy Story or something like that, like where these things, the life that they live without people, and also like how that can sometimes be more magical or exciting, or there's like a new, one man's trash is a shell's treasure.
Now, in thinking about the living space for Marcel and his grandmother, to your point about using our objects to sort of round out and how they might use them differently, what were some of the challenges specific to this film?
I think it's very easy to be like, oh my gosh, Marcel is one of the cutest characters of all time. Like everything around him should be really cute. We don't have to think about where that came from. Like if this thing looks cute next to him, we should do it. And I really appreciated and like was excited by like Dean's impulse that like we don't ever want something that's just cute. It's always got to have a function. And I feel like that's also just like in my design process across projects, how I've always approached things is like I don't want just something decorative. Something should always make sense. Why would a character buy that? Why would they have that thing? How did it end up in their space? So I thought it was really exciting to think about that with Marcel and Nana Connie, his grandma, and the things that they would have held on to. And then also things from our human world that do look really cute in their scale, but also make sense to be there. Like that was one thing with Nana Connie's space. She lives in like an old jewelry box, and we're like, oh, what could we put in here as like decor that would make sense? And so like some of the art on her walls is like postage stamps, because that's like in her scale, but it also is an existing thing she could have had access to. It's not like something shell, because that was another challenge as well, is that the shells can only make things with, kicking it along or like with their mouths. They don't have arms or like thumbs, so they can't do certain things that humans do.
It strikes me during the film that sometimes we're looking at the shells from a human perspective, but then there's other times when we've been almost embedded with the shells and they are also interacting with the human world in the other direction. From the production designer point of view, how does that affect what you're setting up?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think, so much of the film, since it's sort of set up like a documentary, is about kind of, yeah, like flipping that perspective. And there's even, a moment in the film where Marcel starts filming Dean, who's
Yes, I
like,
remember. I remember.
and there is also this whole kind of plot point in the film that Dean doesn't really want to be on camera. And so I think it is exciting to think about like the shell's perspective on our world and on what they think things are for. Like there's a lot of like misuse of items in our world, but for their benefit. Like the kitchen mixer comes to mind, or Yeah, just things like that could be misinterpreted, but in a very beautiful way. But then there's things that also like seem to make sense to everyone, like the record player. It's like Marcel understands that that makes beautiful music, so he's learned how to use it.
Also, talk to me about the outside areas because it's not limited just inside the house. We both have humans outside, but also the shells do things outside as well.
Yeah, well, I think that was a really important part of the film to Dean. And also, one of the reasons he started working with Kirsten Lepore, the animation director, was he was really excited about having the natural world in like a stop motion space, because usually that's such an impossibility. Because, like, just so that the process is sort of clear, like, we shot everything live action, but then it had to go to stop motion stages in order to make the characters move. And so that means that everything that was in like a 3 foot radius around the characters had to be preserved to go shoot at stop motion. So there's a lot of moments where Marcel and Nana Connie are right next to real plants. So in order to make that work, we had to like very carefully kind of like photograph and like take note of what plants they were next to so that they could either fabricate or find, living plants that looked very close, if not identical, although that's an impossibility. Like, it's much easier to make an identical blanket or something than like an identical plant. Like, that's the beauty of plants, just like people. And so that was definitely a challenge, but in a really exciting way. And I think too that Dean was really inspired by like the look of movies like Tree of Life or things like that that really like show the beauty of the natural world. And so I think, to my point earlier about kind of peeking into these spaces we don't normally pay attention to, I think it was really important to him to show that. And like, I'm a huge kind of animal lover and really believe in animal rights and stuff. So it's very exciting to me that there's like moments where we see like ants and other bugs that sort of like don't get their due, where they kind of get to shine and be like stars in the film. So, yes.
Now, you bring up another point as well about the sort of archiving all the information that can be given for the stop motion work when they're doing that later on. But what about scenes where there are practical effects? In other words, Marcel uses this tennis ball to get around the house. How was that an aspect during the live filming, or was a lot of that later animation?
No, so that was one of the most challenging parts of the film, was that it was really important to Dean, which is not normally the case in stop motion, that everything around Marcel moved naturally. So like if Marcel was going to interact with, the drawstring from the blinds, they couldn't do that on the stop motion stage because it would be staccato. It would like not, the movement wouldn't be fluid. So that meant that in the live action shoot, we had to, I'm actually a magician. And so we use like a lot of sleight of hand techniques and other kind of magical techniques, or kind of old school practical effects techniques, in order to get things to move. The tennis ball was one of the biggest challenges because it's like the opening moment in the film is Marcel kind of zooming around this house in a tennis ball. And so we had tried one version of it, and Dean said, no, it needs to zoom down the hall. Like, it needs to be like, the Lamborghinis of tennis balls. And so after like many iterations, we settled on basically what was like a ball robot that we made look like a tennis ball.
Wow. So you could actually remotely control what the tennis ball was going to do.
Yes, you could control all of its movements. And yeah, it was basically like an actor in the film, or like a droid.
Now, how large a crew did it take to pull this off?
We pulled it off with at least in the live action portion. Like, there were many people involved in the stop motion aspect, but in the live action portion of the film, my department was probably a quarter, if not less, of the size it should have been. Like, most people on my team were doing so many people's jobs, and it was pretty miraculous that we pulled it off, and a testament to like how dedicated they were to the project, and also just like their like artistic dedication. So it was not easy, and it was not I don't know, it wasn't one of those jobs where you showed up and you kind of clock in, clock out. It was definitely like a labor of love. Like my right hand person, Jake Tremblay, my art director, literally made it rain. Like he was the person who like sprayed water on windows to make it rain in shots. Cause like there was one scene where we had a water truck, which is like traditionally how you make things rain in movies on location. But every other time, like he would literally get up from like doing SketchUp models and drawings at his desk and go and make it rain, because it was just like, how do we pull this off with what we've got? So him and Ahmed Delgado Riviera, my set decorator, and Haley Appel, the prop master, and Tegan Morin, who is our lead person, like Jonathan Villalobos, one of our set dressers, like we just had, and Bora Kyungmin Lee, and Sonia Giacomezzi. We had like amazing crew who just like really, really put their all into it. But it was a tiny, tiny group. And I forgot many names, but it was a tiny, tiny group.
Any favorite sets you had that we haven't talked about, either particularly because of the challenge or just the way it turned out?
Well, we didn't particularly talk about Nana Connie's like bedroom. That's probably my favorite set, just because I was very close with my grandmothers, and like I'm really love the items of theirs that I have, like their jewelry and things like that. So it was very special to me to sort of create a space related to that. I really love the dining room where we see sort of like Marcel and Nana Connie eating, but then we also see they're in like on the hutch of like a larger dining room. And that was a really exciting set for a few reasons. One was like Dean really wanted these birthday candles around it. That was all done practically. And then, there's this moment where Marcel walks up to sing a song. And Nana Connie is talking about how he's almost like on stage. And I've designed a lot of theater, and I got really excited about like finding a way to create like stairs up to that. So we found this old vintage like coaster set where the coasters kind of come out like stairs. And then I wanted to put like a backdrop. So I had Bora from our crew paint this little like landscape painting that is behind him. And I really love how it looks in the finished film. Like, I just think it's such a special moment, and there was so much kind of like technical artistry that went into that scene that you wouldn't really notice, but like that all had to be shot with like a special, I think, like motion capture rig, so that they could get the movement of the camera exactly the same for the stop motion shoot. So that was like one of the most technically like advanced things we shot in the film.
I also wanted to ask you about the scenes where 60 Minutes comes to the house. You have a production setup that they're going to be filming, which we're very familiar with. So I'm curious, one, whether you lean into the fact that most audience members don't know what a production crew actually looks like and how you design that. And also then adding in Marcel's perspective to this action and, again, this human shell interaction that's taking place in these scenes.
Yeah, well, that was always a really exciting part of the film. And it was really exciting that 60 Minutes was on board. I believe Liz Home, the creative producer, got in touch with them, and they were like all in to do it. And also, it was really important to them that it looked like 60 Minutes. So they literally brought their whole crew, and they brought all their cameras, and they like talked to Bianca Klein, our DP, and they're like, this is how it would look. This is the kind of camera we shoot on. Like, this is where we would put our lights. It was very fun and exciting. And like even that moment where Leslie Stahl is doing her kind of like a monologue on a stool with a graphic behind her, like they had their team like make that graphic, because they're like, this is what we would make it look like. So it was kind of meta in that way, and it was really fun. I mean, it was also just really fun. Like Dean and Nick Paley, the co-writer, had already had like written into the story sort of these beats and jokes about the crew, which are fun if you're like kind of on the inside of it. But I feel like it's really well visualized that anyone would laugh about it, like the tool belt guy and stuff. Yeah, so I don't know. That was like a fun moment. It was sort of like having like visiting day on the set to have these people show up. And in terms of like other visualization of it, I mean, I guess it almost felt kind of natural because I'm so used to setting up those kinds of things that like the iconography of it was very familiar to me. It was like, oh, like, Marcel can be in a pelican case, like being moved around. And yeah, I don't know. That was like pretty easy for me to visualize.
Well, we've really only scratched on the surface of the number of fun moments in this film. I was pleasantly surprised how much I enjoyed it. For you, though, with the film now in the past, and again, having done that work so long ago, what's it like to see it now with what actually is on screen?
Well, I feel like I was like watching the movie like behind, like between my fingers, because it's all. I feel like I've finally gotten to the point in my career where like I enjoy watching the things that I worked on, but working my way up in indie world for so many years, there's always this like, oh no, what is this thing gonna actually look like? Or so I'm excited to see it again with like now that I like don't have the jitters, because I was very like I was sort of like mouth agape the whole time of like, oh my gosh, this looks so beautiful. I like can't even believe how it all came together and all the people involved to make it so special. I'm very proud of how it turned out. I'm very proud to have been a part of it.
Well, congratulations to the whole team. We're going to call it a wrap here. Liz, great having you on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Go see the movie.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Liz, where else are we going to catch your work?
Well, you can go see the recently opened film Emily the Criminal starring Aubrey Plaza, a thriller about student debt that I highly recommend.
We'll look forward to that as well, Liz. That sounds great. Closing credits from me, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.